Why has the U.S. been torturing Cubans for 45 years? Well, actually, we know the answer. It's a very free country. A ton of information about internal planning. The internal record from the early 1960s is very explicit. The reason is what was called Cuba's successful defiance of U.S. policies going back 150 years. So no Russians, but the Monroe Doctrine, which declared that the U.S. is to be the ruler of the hemisphere. And successful defiance is not tolerated, whether it's Serbia or Iran or Cuba. And in fact, right now, Iran falls into the same pattern. Well, another factor that's accelerating the threat of terror and of nuclear war is the U.S.-Israeli rejection of the very broad international consensus on a diplomatic settlement of the Israel-Arab conflict. That rejection goes back 30 years. The first U.S. veto of a Security Council resolution calling for a two-state settlement on the international border was in January 1976. And since then, there's a long record that's pretty similar, which I won't review. And that continues right this minute with ongoing U.S.-Israeli programs to take over the valuable land and resources of the West Bank, leaving separated, unviable cantons, virtually separated from one another, and from whatever small section will be left to Arab Jerusalem, center of Palestinian cultural, educational, commercial life and institutions. All of that is now to be completely imprisoned as Israel, with U.S. backing as always, can't do anything without it, is now officially, it was happening before, but now is officially taking over the Jordan Valley and gradually expelling its inhabitants. What I have to do is take a look at a map, and you see at once what all this means. Well, there's a lot more to say about all of this, and also about the Hamas victory, but it's getting late, so I'll drop it, and maybe we can come back to it if you're interested. Well, the critical question today, of course, is Iraq. And there's a lot of talk about exit strategies. People prevent all sorts of ideas. The proposals are kind of idle unless we pay some attention to some fundamental issues that are in the background, critically. They're kept in the background, kept concealed, in fact, for doctrinal reasons, but you can be pretty certain that they're in the foreground. They dominate the thinking of Pentagon planners. So we have plenty of impressive rhetoric about Washington's dedication to a sovereign and democratic Iraq. Incidentally, we also have equally impressive rhetoric from Iran about their dedication to a democratic and sovereign Iraq in a region of democratic states. Actually, nobody takes the Iranian declaration seriously, but they're much easier to take seriously than the ones from Washington. Iran might not like the democratic and sovereign Iraq, they can live with it. Washington can't. And the reasons are not very obscure. That would be a nightmare for Washington planners. That's why the occupying authorities in Iraq struggled so hard to evade elections. They had scheme after scheme to try to evade them. They were finally compelled to allow them to take place by mass nonviolent resistance. That should be welcomed and cheered by people who believe in nonviolence. It's one of the most impressive achievements. It's not the insurgents. Nonviolent resistance compelled the invaders to finally permit elections. Of course, they immediately tried to subvert them and are continuing to do that now. And it's clear enough why. Sovereignty and democracy would be a nightmare. Just think for a minute about the policies that a sovereign and moderately democratic Iraq would be likely to pursue. If it's moderately democratic, it's going to have has a Shiite majority. They'll be influential, maybe decisive in determining policy. Well, they may not be madly in love with Iran, but they'd much prefer to have friendly relations with their powerful Shiite neighbor than antagonism and conflict, and in fact have been moving towards it. The Shiite religious and political leadership have quite close traditional links with Iran. Many of them come from Iran. Like Ayatollah Sistani is Iranian. The Badr Brigade, one of the main militias in the south, is trained in Iran. And the relations are traditional and they're extending, as you'd expect. Furthermore, Shiite success in Iraq is invigorating pressures for freedom and rights right across the border in Saudi Arabia, where there happens to be a Shiite majority, bitterly oppressed by the ruling tyranny. And those efforts are only going to increase to the extent that Iraq gains some measure of sovereignty. And that happens to be the region where most of Saudi oil is. So just think what this means. The outcome could be a loose Shiite-dominated alliance comprising Iran, Iraq, and the oil regions of Saudi Arabia, independent of Washington, controlling the bulk of the world's oil resources. That would mean that the U.S. would lose control over the world's major energy supplies. They've been recognized since the 1940s to be, quote, a stupendous source of strategic power, one of the greatest material prizes in world history. And that strategic power has a meaning. It means critical leverage over industrial rivals. Speaking of Brzezinski, recently pointed out, referring to the possible benefits of the invasion of Iraq. Well, that outcome would be Washington's ultimate nightmare, London's too. Almost its ultimate nightmare. Could get worse. It's not unlikely that an independent bloc of that kind might develop major energy projects jointly with China and India. Perhaps it might ally with the Asian energy security grid, based primarily in China, and the Shanghai Cooperation Council, also based in China and Russia, including the Central Asian states, possibly incorporating India, which has been developing joint projects with China, all aimed at Asian integration and independence. Bush's visit to India a couple of weeks ago was one of the many efforts to try to impede these clear tendencies. And it's likely, very likely, that South Korea, as a major industrial power, will join in, Southeast Asian countries as well, possibly Japan. Well, just think what all this means. That's a very serious blow to plans for U.S. global dominance that go way back to the Second World War that have never changed since. It's not a minor issue. It's nothing like Vietnam. Those comparisons are outlandish. And that's exactly why the Iranian rhetoric about accepting the democratic and sovereign Iraq is so much more credible than what's coming out of Washington. All of this has a lot of bearing on exit strategies. Well, U.S. intelligence has projected that the United States, while controlling Middle East oil for the traditional reasons, will itself rely mainly on more stable Atlantic basin reserves. That means West Africa and the Western Hemisphere.